Budge! Budge! Budge!
Welcome to Budge, Behavioural Science in Business, Education and Life. And welcome Dr. Darren Coppin, my good mate, Doctor of Psychology, writer, speaker, lover, and of course former WWE superstar. How are you, mate?
I'm very good. Paul Miles, Managing Director of the Busy Group, one of Australia's largest training education organisations. I missed one out, employment as well, and obviously former Miss Merthyr Tydfil runner-up.
The runner-up always hurts.
Yeah.
We're here to talk Budge's nudge theory and behavioural science in business, education and life. And given our backgrounds, particularly around employment, education, training, and how we can use psychology, behavioural science, nudge to make the world a better place and to help improve life and business, I guess. But mate, it's been around for about 15 years. Probably longer, and people have a general idea of what nudge theory is, behavioural science is. But more broadly, I suppose, you're the expert, you're working on the book. What is behavioural science, nudge theory?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Nudge, the term that comes from the book Nudge from Thaler and Sunstein, which is 15 years ago. You find almost any ancient writings address behavioural science and nudge theory, really. Aesop's fables are often nudges for better behaviour. Socrates wrote about these two chaotic horses. The soul is your chariot, and one's pulling in this base direction of desires, the other's more reasoning. And you find that through everyone's writings, even through Darwin, saying that our emotions are an evolutionary leftover, isn't entirely true, but through Friedman, O'Reilly, up to Thaler and Sunstein via Kahneman. But really what it boils down to is trying to get to grips with a human's behavioural biases and why we do things that seem a bit weird, and we think what we're doing is right, but actually what we end up doing is different, and we fall into thinking traps all the time.
And we're going to give lots of examples as we go with this. The major things we're talking about today, of course, Darwinism and was he actually onto something? We're going to talk about flies in urinals in
obviously
Sweden or Toowoomba, one of the two. And we're going to talk about nudge fails, because of course there's been lots of examples of when nudge has actually failed. But to kick us off, mate, you sort of, as part of your work, you've come up with 5 key elements of nudge theory. What are these?
Yeah, it seems pretty apparent. So to understand nudge, the 5 key principles are, first of all, small changes can lead to big gains.
Okay, that's probably where we need an example to kick us off. What does that actually mean?
It can be little things in choice architecture. So the most famous or obvious case initially was in Britain, you by default are an organ donor unless you change and tick a box, and then you're not, and that obviously increased organ donation exponentially. But little tiny changes like a white line in the middle of the road can make a big change and reduce accidents immensely. White lines across a road as you're approaching a bend have proven to reduce accidents by 36%, by reducing people speeding, by just playing with our minds, so on how fast we're going as we approach the bend. So these little tiny changes are great because everyone's so compressed in terms of budgets and what have you, that you don't actually always have to spend a huge amount of money to get a great result.
And is this why government became interested in it, and why organisations like mine became interested, I suppose, is that you can make huge impact with small changes that aren't necessarily going to blow the bank?
Yeah, shortly after the book Nudge was published, the Treasury in the UK jointly set up the Behavioural Insights team. And what do you think the government would focus on first to try and nudge out on? It was taxes.
Really? My mind went crime for some reason, but of course it's taxes.
Yeah, well, it is a crime not to pay your taxes, Paul.
I will one day.
All right. Yeah. So, and they worked out little things like using somebody's first name in a text message and prompts actually speeds up the rate at which people pay their taxes. Just little tiny things like that. And of course, a text costs virtually nothing, particularly.
So these little nudges, they affect people's behaviours. So something as simple as using someone's name, first name. And this is what I mean, is if you want to create rapport with someone, you use their first name a lot, and that instantly enables them or makes them like you more.
Yes, but you can overdo it and
Okay.
go beyond a degree of authenticity, Paul. Because if I kept saying Paul in every other sentence,
Thanks,
Paul,
Darren.
then it becomes a bit
Dr.
bloody
Darren.
annoying.
Yeah. All right. So small changes make big gains.
Yes.
But nudges should be cheap and simple. So why? What does that mean? Why can't you? That was your second point on the the 5 parts of nudge theory and behavioural science. Why shouldn't it be expensive, and why can't you do big things?
Well, you can do big things, but often big things can lead to small gains. So start with the smaller ones first and see how they go. Because quite often there's a very base instinct and trigger for how we behave. And if you can uncover that, then you can get the big gains. So otherwise things are frightening to go for really, we're going to go for a massive change program. Often that's totally unnecessary. And
is this where the urinals come into it? I mean,
it's a great example. I knew you'd be focused on that. But Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam reduced having to clean up around the bottom of urinals by 80% by putting sticking a little fly sticker in the middle of the urinal, which improved gentlemen's aim.
Right, okay. As opposed to in Australia, we just have real flies flying around
Everywhere.
urinals.
Yeah, so they're very messy. That's why Australian toilets are very messy, because you're trying to get flies that are over there and that.
So of your 5, you've come with what is nudge theory. Small changes can make big gains. Nudges should be cheap and simple and scalable, of course. Just explain the scalable part.
Well, it means that if you're trying it in one place or one pilot, then you can actually apply it everywhere. And of course, humans are pretty much the same. What works as a nudge in most areas of the world will work elsewhere. And that's the wonderful thing.
So there's not necessarily massive impacts of cultural bias in this area?
No, there can be, but don't ask me for an example. I can see that in your eyes, your evil eye.
I'll ask you for an example of scalable in a minute.
But no, it just that thing with using people's first name in texts. You can use it for the tax office, but you can also use it in employment and education to check that people are going to come to their next appointment. And you get a better turn-up rate by saying, "Oh, Jim, are you coming to your next appointment?" And then if you say something like, "This person is looking forward to seeing you," a specific person, then you're up turn-up rates even more. If you're phoning up a job seeker or somebody on a course and your phone number is from out a different state, then you get lower pickup rates than if your phone number's from within that state.
An example in my world then would be on social media, when someone asks a question to a company on social media and then the person responds, from the busy group, Ellie or Andy or Christy or something, then because they know there's a real person behind that, it actually makes them engage with it far more and treat them far more kindly than when it's actually they think they're just dealing with a company.
Yes, and that's interesting, the treating them kindly, because there's this bias that mostly we've got a huge negativity bias as one of our biases. In fact, it's one of the predominant ones, that and autonomy and control and what have you. But so the voice inside our own heads is often really negative. Now, if we're in a car, we're in a bubble where we think we're almost in our own heads. So people generally become a lot more sort of aggressive and verbally negative to people. Yeah. And then you realise your window's undone at this and you're going, "Oh, hurry up, you silly old bag," crossing the road. And then you think, "Oh no, my window was undone and she just heard me," and you feel terrible about it. I'm just citing one of the examples that you've
I know, I shouldn't performed. Do that so
much. But it's the same when you're phoning up. If something's faceless, i.e. a call centre in another country where they don't seem to be fully understanding or comprehending your issue, or you feel that they're just doing something cheaply. But if you give somebody a name and they seem more local to you, then you're right, that negativity bias and that almost spite in how you talk is reduced immensely. And as such, the productivity and turnover of staff improves for the call centre staff as well.
Really? Okay.
We can hack these biases, we can allow for them, like we were just talking about in terms of the negativity bias. But there's over 180 of these things. And quite
180 behavioural biases.
Yeah, that have been named so far. You could almost invent a name for almost any behaviour or action. So the thing is, you don't know which ones outweigh other biases. And that's why point 4, and this really comes from Friedman, is that you've got to measure and pilot these things before thinking, that really seemed to work in Sweden, so I'm going to apply it here. You really need to pilot it first. So yeah, it's interesting. So which bias outweighs? So this gives us one of the points you were talking about when nudges go wrong, because you think you're doing exactly the right thing, textbook, you've had examples elsewhere, so you're copying those examples, and then when you apply them to your particular situation, it has the exact opposite effect.
Can you think of an example of that?
Oh, I'm glad you asked me, actually. No, but perhaps my least favourite example is the Mapo Bridge in Seoul, Korea, where 16 people tragically killed themselves, committed suicide off of this bridge every year. It became known as the Bridge of Death. So what they did, the local government commissioned a PR agency to come up with lots of ideas and apply behavioural science and nudges to reduce that. So they had little sculptures of people holding hands or with their arms around each other, little messages on the banisters of the bridge saying, oh, you know, have you eaten well? Are you thinking about your family? Have you spoken to somebody recently? All these great things that have been applied well. They improved lighting, for example. And they won 37 awards for their application of behavioural science and PR to this bridge. And then when they looked at the results a year later, how many people had actually committed suicide there, it increased by 600%. Whoa. 93 people had committed suicide.
So why do you think it increased? Is it as simple as the fact it was drawing attention to this is a good spot for suicide?
Yeah, basically. And that presency bias and that awareness. And it's just saying, well, if I'm going to commit suicide, this is the place to do it.
Wow. Okay.
Even though they've done all the things to prevent suicide.
So what I find strange now is the giving of awards before the actual, I suppose, come back to your fourth point, the results have to be reviewed. Actually giving an award before results are there.
And we can get carried away, and our perception of what's going to work.
So is there examples of where suicide has been reduced through nudge theory, where it's actually been done well, or is this just one of those things where nudges failed in this place?
This comes on to the fifth and final point, is nudges should use libertarian paternalism. So in other words...
You have to explain that very carefully. I've had a Welsh education.
But libertarian just means free, and paternalism means your dad. So it's your dad giving you a bit of advice.
But straight away, though, that's contradictory, isn't it?
Why?
Libertarian, the ability to be have freedom, you get to choose, but paternalism, protecting of each other, they seem to contradict each other.
It does, but as a parent of at least 3 children, you'll know that the best way of having behaviour, improving behaviour, is actually encouraging and suggesting rather than enforcing. Because one of the key biases we have as humans, if we feel something's forced upon us, even if we want it or we think it's a good idea, we'll push back.
Which actually is one of the failures of vaccination mandates. So, I'm obviously very pro-vax and multiple boosters and all that sort of thing. But of course, I know of many people that, although they are pro-vax, didn't get vaccinated because it was forced on them. Is that an example of this type of thing?
So if we remove choice, we remove autonomy, that's removing control. And that's one of our dominant biases. We crave control, even though we're terrible at self-control, but we crave some control because it all boils down to basically freedom. So during using the example of vaccinations, when early on we said, oh, you've got to keep 1.5 meters apart from each other, and we put stickers on the floor. This started off in supermarkets in Denmark. It worked there, it was piloted elsewhere, and we did it, and that really helped people socially distance. And that's libertarian paternalism. It's suggesting, it's not mandating nor enforcing it. So what they had to do on the bridge is not libertarian paternalism, not subtle nudges, it's making things brighter, but putting nets underneath it. That prevents suicides because you can't jump off.
So that's not nudge theory, though. That's simple prevention.
That's more physical, mandated stuff. So when nudge theory doesn't work, you get physical and you order things or you make something legislatively enforced.
Okay.
So, and you can see the difference in how throughout the pandemic we went from nudge through to, we really need to really push this down and be a bit firmer and a bit harder with these things. But often nudge solves things, particularly in business, education and employment. Yeah,
which we're going to talk about in the future. We haven't mentioned Darwinism. Was he onto something?
No, but he said that, as we touched on, that emotions are evolutionary leftovers, and there's kind of roughly three parts of the brain. You can call them reptilian and mammalian, if you like. And mammalian is where emotions start to come into things, and then the human part of the brain over the top, where we've got a bit more self-control. Your prefrontal cortex is controlling and stopping your knee-jerk reactions to things, which doesn't develop until our mid-20s, which is why teenagers are always so infuriating that they just go with their, the tenaciousness and what have you.
Yeah. All right, so in future episodes, mate, we're going to talk about the application of nudge theory, behavioural science in business education and life generally, with a particular focus on work and employment and training. If you do like what we've got to say, by all means engage with us on in the comment section of wherever you're watching this. We're always interested in feedback, and if you're on YouTube, please like and follow, or please like and follow us on whatever app you're using for this podcast. Darren, the 5 things then of nudge theory, we say, you boiled them down to: small changes make big gains, nudges can be simple, cheap, scalable, we can hack our behavioural biases, results must be reviewed, and libertarian paternalism.
Brilliant. Easy and cheap to avoid. Basically.
Easy and cheap to avoid.
Which is you, in a nutshell.
Thanks for watching, everyone.